I'm Stephani Shelton here in Prague, the Czech Republic, for a conversation with leadership coach and author Pepper de Callier. Now, Pepper is a best-selling author of 3 books on leadership and personal development. They're called the Common Sense Wisdom Trilogy. He's a newspaper columnist, a senior executive coach, and founder and executive director of Prague Leadership Institute. He was voted top corporate leadership coach in Europe in 2015 by the London-based All Media. Pepper has devoted his career to understanding counseling and coaching leaders globally. He was formerly a partner at 2 of the most respected executive search and counseling firms in the world, Stuart and Heidrick Struggles. Pepper has advised executives in Asia, North America, and Europe. Now, Pepper's also deeply involved in the development of future leaders. He's a founder and member of the Supervisory Board of the Aspen Institute of Prague, and he has mentored many young women and other rising executives. Pepper, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stephani. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
The state of leadership in general in the world strikes many of us as not too healthy, particularly on the political stage. And of course, it's not just the U.S. It appears to be almost everywhere. It's really, really hard to find what most of us would call a genuine leader. Is political leadership different from corporate leadership? Can one come from the other?
Wow, that's an interesting question. You know, I've been asked to coach political leaders, and I've never accepted the request to do that because I felt that it was a world that I knew nothing about, knew very little about at least. And only from the standpoint of my, experiencing political events and things that I've read about politics. Corporate leadership to me is different because I've spent my life in that world and I understand it. Now, what do they have in common? I think that there's one thing that a friend of mine, Chris Graves, who is the chairman of Ogilvy, based in New York, and I were talking about once is that, Chris has spent his career trying to understand how people make decisions, how to influence people to make decisions. And what he came up with was very interesting. And I use this a lot in my work in helping leaders understand followers and vice versa. And that is this: the important decisions that we make in life, who to marry, where to work, who to vote for, whether or not to buy or rent a house, that car that we're thinking about buying. Those decisions are made emotionally, not logically. Now, since we like to think of ourselves as smart people, what we do is we make the decision and then we immediately look for the facts to back up that decision, whatever we made. Now, there's a really good part to this and a really, I think, dark side to this. And I'll give an example of what I see as the dark side also. The good side is that once we understand this, leaders need to understand how to reach people emotionally, not through just facts and figures and numbers, okay? Now, if we understand that, then as leaders, we can better get our point across in a way that gives us the outcome we desired. And assuming that we're doing things that are good for people and so on, that's a wonderful thing.
But that's a big assumption in politics.
Exactly. And there was a wonderful example of it. First of all, I want to, as a disclaimer, I'm a registered independent, okay? I'm not a Democrat or Republican. But on CNN, Newt Gingrich was being interviewed by one of the political reporters on CNN. And she was asking him about the fact that the Republican convention was so negative, that this was all kind of an emotional outpouring. People were talking about, the rise in violent crime in the United States and so on. And she said, and that the statistics are the exact opposite. In fact, violent crime has been on the decrease in the United States steadily over the past decade. And Gingrech's response was, well, now, you can use theory if you want. And she said, wait a minute. She said, these are FBI statistics. And he said, well, let me tell you something. I'm a politician. I'll let you have the theory and statistics. I'll take the way people feel. And that was such an insight into the world of politics. And here's someone admitting on television, on CNN, that, yeah, you can have the numbers. I don't care about the numbers. It's how we make people feel. And that is really the crux of leadership.
Well, it's the crux of leadership in a good sense, but when it becomes, in a bad sense, the demagogic kind of leadership, exactly. That's where the world is in danger. And without saying anything specifically political about it, the Trump following is almost completely emotion, because his followers apparently don't care what backs up what he says. They're not interested in policy. They just want someone to say it.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at Hillary's followers and Trump's followers, you're going to find the same thing in the sense that they get fired up and they're very emotional, okay? But if we're going to pull apart the things that made them feel emotional, that's a whole different discussion. Was it fact-driven, or was it driven by non-specific information that was like pouring gasoline on a fire? So that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, and with the Hillary phenomenon, there are a great many women who see her the first woman political candidate for president, mm-hmm. and that's the overriding, and that's an emotional thing. I'm a woman. She's finally made it. Therefore, we have all made it.
And that, Stephanie, you've just touched on the driving force here. It's emotion. And so leaders need to understand how to get in touch with that. Good leaders understand how to get in touch with it in a fact-driven, positive way that elicits a positive outcome.
Okay, so we're back to the beginning of the question, which is, if there is a leadership gap, which so many people seem to feel there is it emotional because they're not reaching people? Are they good leaders but not communicating properly? Or are they just not good leaders?
Well, there's all of the above, if you'll allow that. But I would say that one of the most common phenomena that I am witnessing in my work is that, as we moved from the 20th to the 21st century, we moved into the more digital. In fact, a big buzz right now is companies say, we're going digital, okay? And going digital is code for we're going to do more with less, all right? That's code, okay? I'll give you a little corporate code speak there. But what happens is going digital can raise the level of anxiety in a way. And that is this. I tell companies that are going digital that there is a danger and there's a paradox that they're going to face in doing this. The danger is that all of those silos that we spent the last 25 years trying to break down in communication, because everything was becoming very siloed. You hear that term all the time in boardrooms.
Yes.
We run the danger of recreating those silos in a digital world, because now we know the average number of a team members is 8. So now, instead of having all the team members in New York City, we've got them in San Francisco, San Antonio, Chicago, and so on. So we run the risk now of recreating those silos. Now, here's the paradox, and this touches on answering your question more directly. The paradox is this, that as we become more digital in the way we do things, the greater the need becomes for our analog skills or interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills are what create a human link, team cohesion, and engagement, okay? Now that is the secret sauce for leadership. good leaders, and it's what separates good leaders from bad leaders. Now, what it looks like in day-to-day practice is this. I'm under pressure, okay? I'm a leader, and I'm under pressure, and I know that I'm being reviewed on a quarterly basis. And so I'm driving for the numbers, and all I talk to you about, everything we talk about is transactional in nature. Stephani, do this. By 4 o'clock on Friday, I want that report, and then I want your numbers then again on Monday, and let's meet again on Wednesday afternoon, and I want to make sure that everything's moving on Friday. So we become very, very focused on the transactional nature of business. And what we're missing, and what people miss, is the rationale, the feeling of doing something. Here we get back to that word feeling again. The feeling of doing and how they fit into the process. Because some leaders feel they don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. I'm running a company. I've got to get this and that. Boom, boom, boom. Got to get it done. And what I tell them is this. You don't have time not to make a human link with someone, to create that human link. That gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them a sense of resonance. It gives them a sense of relationship to you as a leader. And so this is, in the 21st century, this is what separates the good leaders from the bad leaders, or the leaders who are really just bringing threshold performance out of people. The ability to relate to them, the ability to have people feel engaged.
It's interesting because in my business, which is journalism, we look for the human element to every story. And it's sometimes hard to tell a numbers story for business news because there isn't always a human element. But if you look hard enough, you can find a person that has been affected and build your story around it. And emotion, human element, that's what makes people watch or listen or read your news story, because it's about me. It's not about me. I hate that person. I love that person. There's something that you connect with. So what you're saying to me really is that almost everything important in the world, and I consider leadership the most important thing, essentially after a free press. I have to put that first.
And there are fun ways to discover this, by the way. If you look at man-in-the-street interviews, let's say, during a presidential election cycle, what you're going to find is a reporter goes up to someone and says, tell me, why are you voting for candidate X? And they'll say things like, I really like the way that person talks about the economy, or there's just something about him. That person's believable, okay? And then you're going to find people that say, I like the fact that that person's talking about creating an economy that is 3%, more productive, and so they'll give you the facts. But I think when you look at the interviews, you're going to find that the great majority of them are the former. They're the examples of how people feel about the candidate.
I don't know if you have specifically looked at the Brexit vote in Great Britain in terms of what was wrong and what was right. But it seems to me that that both sides ended up communicating untruths, essentially lying about, with great certainty what would happen if we stay, what would happen if we go. And that in a way, the fact that almost every party's leaders just abdicated after the vote and they had fought for or against it. I mean, what does that tell you about how that whole thing was conducted? And it was so important.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Brexit is I think it will go down undoubtedly in my mind in history as one of the finest examples of how the stories got mixed up and went wrong and really had a powerful, powerful impact. Let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. Depending on what side you're on, I don't care. I mean, I'm just looking at the outcome of it. What Google said after the vote took place, Google, focusing on just the United Kingdom, said the most searched for phrase was, what is the European Union?
Yeah.
I mean, these people felt as though, whoa, wait a minute, maybe I didn't understand this, okay? But again, I'm going to go back to feeling. That's a big sign there, isn't it? That this was a vote placed on feeling. It's not on fact, because now I'm trying to find out what the European Union is, okay? And so I think that what we're going to find is a classic in 6 months' time, and we'll see if I'm right, but let's go out 6 months' time and see what the reaction is among the British people. But I think they're going to be tremendously disappointed in the things that were promised, the things that were alluded to in a very strong way that did not happen. And I think that that is going to be a very telling story. Let's see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. But I think that the whole narrative of Brexit got out of the realm of political discourse where we talk about figures and we talk about numbers and so on and so forth and facts, and strayed off completely into the realm of the emotional. And unfortunately, I think that now we're seeing in press accounts that many people would not have voted the way they did. And in fact, now we've created, or they've created, a real situation that needs to be dealt with Scotland because of this.
Right, exactly. Well, okay, taking Brexit, taking the primary votes for Donald Trump, looking at President Zeman here in the Czech Republic, some other leaders, some of the Greek elections, for instance, there seems to be, and I'm changing the subject a little bit, a huge mistrust of the business world. Wall Street, London, you name it, and the big global companies who are making so much money and whose chief executives make so much money. And so many people look at them and saying, I don't have a job, or I don't have a good job, or I have a job, but I'm still making the same amount of money I made 10 years ago. And look at these people with their multi-million-dollar salaries. All they care about is squeezing more profit out of everything. We can't trust them. Let's get rid of them. Let's break them up. Is that a fair assessment? And does that mean, are they necessarily bad, or are they not communicating what they do correctly?
Well, there are a lot of questions in there that you've asked, but let me see if I can sort of disaggregate those and sort of unpackage this in a way that makes sense. First, from the political standpoint, I think it was John Zogby, who's a member of my faculty, one of the top market researchers in the world today, he's done a lot of interesting work with millennials. And one of the things that he found out, I found absolutely fascinating about the millennials, and that is this. They believe in government. They believe in the value of government, but they distrust politicians. Think about that for a second. It's like we understand the structure, the need for the structure, but we don't trust the people who are in charge of the structure, okay? So keep that thought in mind for a moment. And then let's go to the business world. And I could apply the same thing to the world of business in the sense that we understand the value of having corporations. They produce value for us. They products and services and so on. But what the real question is the person behind the curtain, the leader. What's really going on here? Because the obvious facts, the things that are obvious to us, the things that we can read, the things that we can see, shows that there's maybe something's going on here. There could be an abuse in some companies. And I would take you back to a BBC clip that I use in some presentations that I make that was right after that terrible incident in Tunis where Mohamed Bouazizi self-immolated. And there was a reporter standing in front of a pile of just rubbish that had been set on fire by a bunch of the students in a protest and so on. And he's standing there, and he's looking at the camera, and he says, you know, the problem here is that people feel that their government just doesn't care about them. Think about that for a second. And I'm going to apply that to the corporate world. People who feel disaffected by these things that they see in differences in income and so on, differences in benefits, they feel as though they are not cared for by the people that they work for and the people they serve as their leaders. Now, I want to make a clear distinction here. They are not talking about a feeling of being cared for. That's entitlement. They're talking about being cared about. That is different. This is all about the challenges that you have to face as a person, your own opportunities to develop yourself and be involved in this enterprise. That's caring about someone. And so when we see people who are, let's say, at least the impression is that they're taking advantage of the system and they're serving themselves to the detriment of others, that's when we have this real disconnect in what I call caring leadership. Caring leadership doesn't mean you have to like people or they have to like you. It means you have to care about them and care about their own plight, their own challenges, and their own desires in life. And that's when people become engaged. I hope that answers your question.
Well, it answers it up to a point. But I'm thinking about the very large company that I freelance for as a radio anchor. And I'm thinking about the corporate communications we get constantly. And there is a constant effort to allow the people who work in this far-flung company to see who their leaders are. But it's all digital. It's all, we're going to have a town meeting. If you happen to be in New York at that particular moment, at that particular hour, you can come to the studio, but be sure to RSVP because we're limited in space. But otherwise, here it is. You can watch it on this channel. You can watch it after the fact, and so on and so on. It's a legitimate effort to let us see and for some people to ask some questions. But it's not the same as when it was a smaller company. And when they had these meetings, we could all crowd into a room and touch the leader, in a sense.
This is a challenge today, and that is the scalability of becoming digital. Let's go back in history, and I'll show you how a politician did it, Franklin Roosevelt. The fireside chat, okay? Everybody sat by their radio and listened for this fireside chat. Now, that was an example of how a leader cared about the constituency, about the people who followed him. He wanted to communicate with them. So what I tell companies today is that you have to find the way in which, the genuine and authentic way in which you and your company can scale into the digital world without losing touch with your analog skills that are so important to success today. An example I gave a global company a couple of months ago that I'm working with. They're a leader in going digital. And I said, so how are you guys going to create, your own version of the analog side of this? And what they came up with was really a very cool thing. Once a week, this particular team that I was working with has created a get-together, and it's through the in-house video product that they have, so they can actually see each other. Okay, the 8 people on this team, they call it Hangover Monday, and so on Mondays they get together, and it's an unstructured conversation. There is no agenda, no business is discussed. It's just people connecting on the video, talking about whatever they want to talk about at that moment. And that's their way.
a great idea if you're small enough to do that in a team, for instance. But when you get into a very large company, and now I'm taking it back to what you said
Right.
about the feeling that you're not cared about, how do you do that?
Okay. There are a couple things that come to mind immediately. One is you work for a company that specializes in communications. And so instead of having just the people who can pack into this crowded room in New York there for the town meeting, it seems to me as though it would be easy to include everyone who ever worked for your company, everyone who works for them now, in a audio link up, that they could be part of this. That is a way of making this so incredibly inclusive that it sends a message. Okay, that's a very powerful message. Okay, now that takes a little bit of effort to do.
Yeah, what if you have 100,000 employees?
Well, the company that I'm talking about, that I gave you the example of, has more than 200,000 employees, but they're doing this on the segmented basis of different teams, different divisions, and so on. So this is where it gets back to, this is a way, there is a way that is authentic and genuine for you, for your company, and for your team. But you must find it, okay? There's no one size fits all. The other thing, when we elevate this to the optics of a leader, what does the leader do? This is going to sound very simple, okay? It's going to sound very silly to some people, but it is so powerful that and I've seen it work over the years. One of the things, the most powerful thing a leader has in building a corporate culture, in supporting the mission and vision of their company, is their personal example. And let me tell you something. That is the most powerful thing a leader has. I'm going to give you an example that I worked with many years ago. An aerospace company based on the East Coast asked me to attend a meeting they were going to have with some of their divisional leaders on the West Coast. I was asked by the CEO to come, and the whole topic was how they needed to cut back, how they needed, and this was like 25 years ago, how they needed to cut back. Now they're going to have to downsize a little bit. They're going to have to find ways to get more productive and so on and so forth. This is tough times, okay? So he called a meeting, and he wanted me to attend to see how I felt the message, went across and so on and so forth. So he calls the meeting at the Beverly Hills Peninsula Hotel, okay, which is where he was staying because he had a suite there, okay? And he called the meeting for first thing in the morning. That's how he announced it in his email to the people, which was at 10 o'clock, because he didn't do meetings before 10 o'clock, okay? So he calls them together in this space, and he's telling them, we got to cut back. We got to, blah, 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 blah. And we're going to, and so he goes through all of this, and he says, and I want to take a break now. This is in the afternoon. Let's get together for dinner tonight, and we're going to, finalize this. And I want to hear from you about your ideas about it. So they did. They adjourned. They get together for dinner again at the Beverly Hills Peninsula Hotel. Fine wine was served. I mean, it was a very expensive get together. So they had their discussion, blah, 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 blah. And so he asked them to meet once more before he left for breakfast, again at 10, okay, the next morning, just before he got into his chauffeur-driven 7 Series BMW to go to a private jet, so that he could go back to the East Coast, okay? And everyone knew this was going on. So about a week later, I flew to the East Coast to meet with him. And he said, Pepper, so what did you think? How did this go? And I looked at him and I said, there was a real feeling, because I stayed around afterwards and I talked to people and listened. I said, there was a real disconnect there. There was a feeling that you were asking them to do something that you would not do yourself. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget this exchange. He looked at me and he said, you know what? He said, that's their problem. I've worked very hard for what I have, and if they can't accept it, then the hell with them.
Oh, boy.
Within the year, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was acquired by their biggest competitor. And so that, to me, was a powerful lesson of example.
Pepper de Callier, leadership coach, and my friend, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Stephanie. It was my pleasure.
I'm Stephani Shelton.